In the United States, 80 people fatally overdose on opioids every day, and millions of Americans struggle with addiction. Now there's a new weapon in the battle against the opioid epidemic. The FDA has approved the first ever implant that continuously dispenses the opioid addiction medication buprenorphine for 6 months at a time. The medication inside the device has been used in its oral form for the last 14 years, and it's been a popular tool for eliminating withdrawal symptoms. Joining us now to talk about this is Dr. Michael Lowenstein. He's a specialist in medical opiate detox. Welcome.
Thank you.
The FDA just approved the first ever opioid implant. What's been the response so far from patients in the medical community?
Well, I think it's being viewed as just another important tool that we can use in this battle against opiate abuse and dependence. There's no one size fits all for treatment of these patients, and I think anytime we can add another tool, it's just one more step closer to dealing with this very serious epidemic.
Yeah. And as a detox doctor, I mean, you've probably seen lots of patients dealing with this. So you're familiar with it. How familiar are other doctors with this drug, and are they trained to use it?
Well, I think buprenorphine itself in the forms of Suboxone and Subutex have been around long enough that the majority of doctors are familiar with it. In the detox community, I think those physicians are very familiar. It is being used, for office-based detox to some extent by, family medicine doctors and non-addiction specialists. And I think generally the general physician population and patients are aware of it to some extent.
Now, what about doctors in terms of inserting and removing this implant? Are they going to be trained on it?
Yeah, I believe there's currently approximately 4,000 physicians that have demonstrated an interest in implanting it. Obviously, it needed its FDA approval before this could begin. And I believe it's going to be a one-day education to specifically instruct doctors with the implantation. Ideally, it'll be people that have some surgical expertise or experience because it will require an office-based implantation into the forearm of a patient.
And tell me a little bit about how the dosage works. Is it the same amount, or does it vary per person?
There are 4 implants, and I believe they're each 80 milligrams. So the total implanted dose initially will be 320 milligrams. And I think in its FDA-approved state, each patient will initially receive all 4 of the implants.
So, what's some of the cons? I know that obviously having an implant in your arm, you're not going to have the option to overdose with that or sell it on the street. But what else have you seen so far?
Well, anytime there's any surgical implant, there's always, the common side effects of skin irritation. There's a small risk of infection, of nerve injury, things like that, site insertion issues. When you implant something, you can't really control the dosage. In the studies, it's probably equivalent to somebody who was taking about 8 milligrams of buprenorphine a day. So for patients who require a much lower dose, they may have some side effects. Or for people that require a larger dose, they may not be a good candidate because it won't adequately cover their needs for the opioid. So that's one concern, is how are you going to adjust dosage based on the individual patient's needs? And it's going to be one of those things that just worked out as time goes on, and as the probuphine gets implanted in more and more patients, there's obviously going to have to be some adjustments to how it's dosed and how it's used in the individual patient.
Now, I know addicts go to the methadone clinics to receive their doses every day, those who are suffering from withdrawal. Is buprenorphine a safer option than methadone?
In general, it's thought that buprenorphine is a safer medication than methadone. It's a partial agonist, so the theoretical risk of respiratory depression and overdose is less. It can be dispensed, traditionally Suboxone can be dispensed for a longer period of time so you don't have to go on a daily basis. Um, Methadone has been associated with some cardiac issues that can increase risk of sudden death in some patients. And so I think overall buprenorphine is viewed as a potentially safer option than methadone.
Okay. Now, when the studies were conducted for this opioid implant, what did they find? How effective was it?
They found that the success rate, if you looked at it versus placebo, more patients did well for the duration of the study. There was less dropout. There were some side effects which is associated with any medication, but I
Okay.
think overall the patients who participated for the duration of the study, there was fairly positive response.
I know a lot of people, the first question on their mind is, how much is this going to cost me? Is this something that somebody has to pay out of their pocket, or would insurance cover this?
Well, that's a good question. The pharmaceutical company that makes it is attempting to keep it in approximately the same range as would the cost would be for someone taking Suboxone or one of the other, or naltrexone, one of the other medications used for the treatment of opiate addiction dependence. There's been discussion of rebates if there's a significant difference in cost. I have not seen specific information regarding the actual cost or whether or not insurance will cover it. I think that was, a lot of that discussion was pending the FDA approval, which took place yesterday.
So there's probably still quite a few details still being worked out.
Yes, that's my understanding.
Now, one thing critics are saying is that this implant will incentivize patients to not attend addiction counseling. What's your response to that?
Well, I think there's an important issue with anybody that's being treated for opioid abuse syndrome or opiate addiction. One thing is you have to stabilize their drug usage, and that could be anywhere in the form of methadone, Suboxone orally, the new implant, or whether they're taking the blocking medicine naltrexone. I believe that's just one key to stabilize the opiate use. But everybody who is being treated for opiate use or abuse needs to address their underlying psychosocial issues, because the key is addressing all of those things. I believe that most patients have some underlying issues, psychological or socially, that lead to them using opiates, because opiates are just a numbing device. They numb physical and emotional pain. So most people are seeking to feel well, and so that's why they use the opiates. So once you've stabilized that opiate use and reduced the risks of whether it's using heroin or prescription meds or whatever the patients are doing, you absolutely have to deal with the underlying psychosocial issues. So this is not a replacement for that. I really believe it's just to stabilize the individual so that they can get the appropriate support and psychological therapy and address those true underlying issues appropriately
Gotcha.
to be successful going forward, and to prevent that. Addiction is referred to as that chronic remission and relapse. So you really got to break that revolving door, that cycle. And I think it doesn't matter whether it's an implant or methadone clinic or oral Suboxone or naltrexone. The psychosocial support and treatment is an absolute must
Okay.
for long-term success.
Good to know. One thing I want to ask you about, buprenorphine is being marketed for people to treat them, those who are addicted to opioids. Could this implant also be used in replace of pills to avoid a potential addiction from developing? So say someone gets hurt, and instead of prescribing them pills, perhaps give them the implant to avoid the possibility of becoming addicted. Is that something that you could see in the future?
I do. I think there's a step between somebody initially taking opiates and becoming addicted, and everyone in between there at some point becomes opiate dependent, meaning that if they discontinue the opiates, they're going to withdraw. So if you can address the issue during that dependent stage before they actually become an addict, which addicts a lot of the behavioral issues that result from the dependence. I think you can, if you intervene early, you can prevent them from developing the addiction. So I think it is a potential step in treating that opiate dependence before it becomes addiction.
All right, good to know. For more information on Dr. Lowenstein's treatment methods, you can visit opiates.com. Thanks so much for joining us tonight, Dr. Lowenstein.
Thank you very much.